Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Now then, you're very welcome along. So Wednesday Night Rugby, very happy to say Rúaidhrí O'Connor of the Irish Independent here in studio. You're very welcome, thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
And Mr. Keith Wood is with us, presumably from Killaloo. Hello.
Hi, Joe.
Great to have you with us. So a few things going on. The weekend that was had wins for Leinster against Ulster. Munster beat Zebre Parme, and Connacht, as we know, lost in Pretoria. And I suppose all eyes on Galway this Friday, 4G pitch, Connacht against Munster. What Rúaidhrí O'Connor has termed the desperation derby, and it's actually caught on a little bit. So I'm not sure the two teams love your marketing ploy, but there's something in it. It's caught on.
Oh, we got to sell it somehow, don't we? So it's the RC, and it's still early October. So yeah, I'm going to stick with it.
Desperation points to hotly contested, I suppose.
Well, it's you know, I think Bernard Jackman was talking about it being, you know, if there was relegation in the league, it would be a relegation 6-pointer. I don't think it's quite that bad, certainly from Munster's point of view. But where it does get tricky for both teams is if they want to be in the Champions Cup next year, they've got to start winning games. And because meritocracy is no longer applied in the URC, top 8 position does not guarantee you European Champions Cup places, as Glasgow found out to their cost last year, because you're guaranteed one team from Wales, one team from Ireland, one team from South Africa, and one team from either Scotland or Italy. You have to start picking up points early. 56 was what got Munster into Europe last year. They were the lowest ranked team who didn't top their conference, essentially. So while it's early season, they've got 6 of a possible 15, and they need to start winning very, very soon. So that's why I moved into that territory. While also, you know, it's just it was a good headline.
Well, to more sobering news, first of all. So numerous front pages, not just sports pages, but front pages of newspapers, I think, including your own, Rory, led with this study from Scotland, which is deeply alarming, deeply concerning, deeply upsetting for all concerned with the game. Rugby players 15 times more likely to develop motor neuron disease versus the general population. So this was published yesterday in the Journal of Neurology, Neurosurgery and Psychiatry. In effect, the study compared 412 male former Scottish internationals against 1,200 people in the general populace, and it was conducted by Willie Stewart of University of Glasgow, a man synonymous with this kind of work over the last number of years. And so again, the frightening headline for anybody involved in rugby, these former Scottish internationals 15 times more likely to develop motor neuron disease versus the general population. They're also, by the way, 2.5 times more likely of neurodegenerative disease generally than the general population, but that's obviously a good deal short of the 15 times when it comes to MND. So Willie Stewart doing interviews all over the media across the day. I was listening to him, for instance, on TalkSport, a station not prone to covering rugby union all that often, and he has said the numbers are, quote, a big surprise. And what was said in the publication is this is further insight into the association between contact sports and neurodegenerative disease risk. Of particular concern, the data on motor neuron disease. And really, they say this finding requires immediate research attention. So they're sounding the klaxon and saying we need to get into this and find out what the hell is going on ASAP, more research ASAP. So Willie Stewart in interview said, I'm genuinely concerned about what's happening in the modern game, and if in 20 years' time we repeat this study, that we would see something more concerning. Keith, not the first time this issue has arisen in rugby, but I mean, those figures are utterly frightening for anybody concerned with the game.
Yeah, they're pretty terrifying, and it's a reasonable sized study. It isn't a tiny study, and the line that comes out of it, that there needs to be more study done on it straight away, is something that sticks out an awful lot. I mean, the headline number is terrifying, and the idea of this being, you know, not taken fully seriously would be truly terrible for the sport. So like whatever has to be done to gather more information for that has to be done, and has to be done very, very quickly. I had, by coincidence, I was with Jody Weir for the weekend in Scotland, and as you know, Jody was diagnosed with motor neuron 5 years ago, and He truly is a force of nature. But it's incredibly debilitating. What he has managed to do in terms of highlighting the issues are pretty stark, and he has managed to fundraise a colossal amount of money with it, and his drive, his mental fortitude is still absolutely there, but it's tough. It's very, very tough. I remember when we were doing a fundraiser at one stage a couple of years ago in Dublin, I had a conversation with one of the researchers, one of the motor neuron disease researchers, and she had said that high energy activity had a correlation to higher numbers of motor neuron disease. And so the more studies that come out from this, the I'm going to say the better, but we need to get to the root cause of them, because we don't want to have this. It's such a debilitating disease. We don't want to have any more of this. Of that number, 15 times seems ludicrously large. So it's pretty terrifying.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with that, and what it does is it adds to what we already know about brain injury in rugby, and the CTE issue, which we've discussed in here before. And Willie Stewart, who I've interviewed, is a very impressive man. He comes at this, from a scientific point of view. He played amateur rugby. He had a passion for the game. I think he's been quite disenfranchised by it in the last decade, and is unafraid to speak his mind when it comes to it. But he's also been backed up by his own research, and he's done great work in football as well in terms of heading the ball. And it's him that was behind that big study a couple of years ago, but same group of researchers. And he is sounding the alarm bells for the current game. And we will talk about two things, I think. The current game and medical science is making advances, and we're seeing players being stood down, out of concern for their well-being. Like Alex Candell in the Munster this week, Caelan Doris is currently being stood down, and that's something that wasn't happening when these players that were part of this study were playing. We're seeing, recognise or remove. We're seeing HIAs. The processes that are there are far greater, are far better and more stringent than what was there before, which was the Wild West, really, because people weren't thinking about this. It was having your bell rung, as we talked about that before. Culturally, and also the rules, the laws of the game are now set up to try and stamp this out, even if the players aren't adapting to it as quickly as we'd like. We're seeing a lot more red cards than we ever had before, and that is all moving in the direction of trying to. Contact training is being reduced on a massive rate basis, and Peter O'Reilly had that piece that you talked about in the pay-per-view on Sunday, where he spent time at Leinster training, and they spent 15 minutes, I think it was, between their entire week sessions doing contact, and it's not even full contact really. All of that is happening, and the game is trying to make strides and fighting against it. And Willie Stewart is saying that it's not enough because the players are faster, the players are stronger, and there's too many matches. And they're playing, some of these players that were involved in the study weren't playing very frequently at all. They played a couple of matches a year. It wasn't the same game. It wasn't played at the same intensity. We may speak later about the fact that the game is too slow, it's too stop-start, that it needs to be faster. Well, you've got these incredibly strong athletes running into each other all the time over the course of, how many rucks is there per game? It's 100, 200 odd rucks in a game. Mauls, scrums, all of those things, and it's leading to these impacts over and over again, these concussive impacts, which we see when they're high profile, they're withdrawn, but also subconcussive impacts at a micro level that are building up over time. And it's that race that's going on, and Willie Stewart is calling for is quite simple: remove contact from training and reduce the number of games. And I think Keith has spoken about how he thinks there should be fewer games. I hope I'm not misquoting him on that. You would increase the quality in that way, but the economics of the game pull against that. And we're seeing Worcester go to the wall this week. We're seeing Wasps in trouble in England. And they would say we need more games because we need more bums on seats on a weekly basis. The broadcasters want games. They want something every week to fill their schedule from Friday evening until Sunday night. Everything's pulling in different directions, and the players are getting lost in it. I think within Ireland, the number of games that are played is so tightly controlled by the RFU. That's a good thing. We've seen examples in the provinces of players. Marty Moore was stood down at the end of last season. Caelan Doris, Johnny Sexton, James Ryan at Leinster, and now Candellin at the moment at Munster have all been stood down at a time where they're needed. Candellin would have started last weekend. Sorry, he'd be in Emerging Ireland on the Emerging Ireland tour. So that's good to see. Yeah. And the things that Leinster are doing that you'd imagine are being replicated, they're good to see as well. But it's just whether the game as a whole, as a global thing, is able to pull together. It's not able to pull together on the other front. So how are we all going to pull together on this front?
Willie Stewart was speaking at length over the last 24 hours. You've echoed some of the points he's made. So contact training during the week should be viewed as a thing of the past, is what he said. And that Peter O'Reilly week with Leinster behind the scenes was very encouraging on that front. 15 minutes is done a week, sometimes not even, and not in a concurrent 15-minute spell. It might be 5 minutes one day and 10 minutes another day. And Lancaster was absolutely emphatic in saying we're virtually never at level 3, we're at level 2, which is non-contact, and that's all we need to do. So if that's replicated everywhere, and I don't know if it is or isn't, I don't know what's happening in Premiership training or the other provinces, but let's assume that's implementable in a relative short period of time. Box that off as done. What Stewart is also saying, Keith, and Rory mentioned this, is the number of games. So he says instead of talking about extending seasons and introducing new competitions and global seasons, they should be talking about restricting it as much as possible, cutting back on the amount of rugby we are seeing, getting rid of as much training as possible, look at the number of matches being played and ask, is this credible that young men and women can be playing week in, week out for the majority of the year just for entertainment? I know it's tough to think about there being less rugby rather than more.
Yeah, look, it makes an incredibly awkward conversation, a very, very difficult conversation. I mean, you quoted me correctly, Rory. I was trying to say that there's a constant push to try and make the game bigger, as in more matches, more leagues, go into other places. Rugby it's a big sport, but it's nothing like football. And I think we continually kind of maneuver along the lines as if the economics that are involved with football will somehow relate to the economics in rugby. And whereas the only place that seems to fit at all seems to be in France, maybe Japan. Even within England, there was a report during the week just on the pure economics of it, of how much in a whole all the clubs were. Now, the reason that they're not all struggling is because they've been funded by somebody who's been willing to pay the amount, the shortfall every year. So the turnover of these as businesses needs to be an awful lot better, or the players' salaries have to be cut very significantly. And in some respects, the salaries would have to be cut as a business. But, I don't know that you want to say to guys that for what you're putting your body through, you should be paid less, So it's one of those very kind of uncomfortable type of conversation. But for me, the game is just extended too long in the year. There isn't a definable off season really, because actually there's tours in all the off seasons. So pretty much you end up with 6 weeks, but the amount of recovery level is not quite there. It isn't as defined as you'd like it to be, because it never really had a coordinated approach towards what professional rugby would be once the game went open in '96. Yeah. So if it had been all tied into to the unions, then it might have been looked at very differently. But now there is different people own different rights, and because of that, they have put a lot of money in towards it. So they're looking from that perspective. But for me, for the enjoyment of playing, and I'm long since playing, I'm nearly 20 years retired. So that idea of wanting to play every week, of course we wanted to play every week, but you do want to have an end of a season. So if there's any way of tidying it up, it may come down to the idea that health and safety grounds may be the forcing mechanism for a restructuring of the game. But it's just disturbing to read those reports. And look, all those reports need to be fully verified. They need to be brought up, and they need more research to go on the back of it. The headline figure on all of them is terrifying. So when you're then looking at, and we've talked about existential issues with the game, and most of them have been financial, well, these are health ones. And it's yes, it's entertainment. Yes, it's a job. Yes, this fits the bill in different elements. And we've discussed NFL in the past as to whether we'd go down that model of 16, 17 matches regular season. The game isn't viable financially at the moment. And this is just going back to the finances. It's not. So how it's structured requires a large number of people to put huge amounts of money in to bolster clubs in the UK. We manage it in Ireland by the IRFU bolstering the provinces. It's one big pot. The provinces actually own the IRFU, so it all kind of fits in a strange fashion. But it does work within Ireland. It doesn't work in an awful lot of other countries. So I don't know. It's one of those things where you're sitting down and saying, God, this is a horrible moment in time for anybody that's afflicted by any of the impacts of the game. And then you have a sport and entertainment business that is on the edge and has been on the edge for a little while now.
Steve Thompson, who needs no introduction on a chat like this, he has a documentary airing this evening on BBC prime time. It will have millions of viewers, and Keith Wood talked there about the terrifying headlines. These are mainstream headlines. So rugby faces existential threats financially, and with health and safety in mind, it will face a very immediate and potentially very sudden existential threat in the area of participation, because, as Keith says, you need deeper research, and that will take time. But in the short term, mums and dads all over Ireland, all over the UK will say no smoke without fire, no chance. Just no chance. And Bernard Jackman was on the paper review recently, and he was talking about, less elite levels being less dangerous, and absolutely I would take his perspective on that. But he did also describe it at underage level or different levels that he's coaching at now. Increasingly, there are the group partaking in full contact training and training as would have happened over the previous decades. And increasingly, there is a group to the side who are non-contact. Now, that group's going to get bigger. And again, it's like a three-pronged: financial, health and safety, and then participation. Now, this is really existential, and this can happen so quickly. Like 15 years, tap can be turned off here.
Absolutely, and I think that's where the tipping points may come in terms of the unions waking up to the fact that they have to change, because they can talk about change and they can, I understand you need as much information as possible to make these decisions, but these are real-time issues. And while the most important part of this is the people involved's health, there is a perception battle as well and a PR battle. And that PR battle, the information that's being put out there, and it's coming from good sources, and it's real. And Steve Thompson's testimony and the testimony of the players who've spoken to David Walsh in the Sunday Times, like Ryan Jones, and the parents of Siobhan Cadigan, like one of the most harrowing, brilliant pieces of journalism, but also harrowing pieces of journalism I've ever read. That all feeds into the decision as to what I'm going to send my child to do on a Saturday or Sunday, or whether I'm going to allow them go to rugby training after school. And that's where the next generation will come from. And I'm anecdotally aware in the WhatsApp groups of my friends, and I've got a 2-year-old. My friends would all have kids of a different, between 2 and 10. Some of them have their kids playing rugby. Some of them wouldn't let them be seen dead. And it's something that myself and my wife will have to discuss before we go there, and I have to listen to what she thinks. And I have reservations. I also see the benefits. I know what it did for me. I played amateur rugby not very well for 20 years, and it was a very important part of my life. It's given me my job, and I love the sport. But I see the drawbacks as well, and I think there's already a participation crisis at amateur level below kind of your professional game. I think the number of teams that compete at each club is compressing all the time. The RFU have brought in a kind of a touch scheme to try and keep people just playing some form of the game in England, because after COVID in particular, a lot of lads who have just been getting injured playing rugby, whether it's their head or their shoulders, and I've been missing work. I've just said this is not what I want to spend my weekend doing. But it's because minis rugby has been what's keeping clubs going, and in terms of like the numbers. If you go to if you go to Belleville, Lansdowne on a Saturday in Dublin, it's the hundreds of kids on the pitch that are kind of keeping the place thriving. If that's where the game has started. They see Johnny Sexton play on a Saturday, they want to play it themselves. That is where I think the tipping point will come. If those numbers start to dwindle, if the schools are struggling to field teams, then they'll have to change, because there won't be any future for the game. We're not at that point yet. People still seem to want to let their kids play, but I do think a lot of people are asking the question and wondering whether they'd be better off sending them down to the GA club or the soccer club.
Yeah. Keith, last one on this before we move on to matters more on the field? I mean, people I'm sure will be aware that rugby is, part of your family's life, and you'd be very involved in the community. Do you hear concerns from parents, or has it filtered down to that level?
I think everybody's discussing it. I don't know. Look, I do think the numbers are dropping off at different degrees, and a lot of that did come after COVID. And a lot of it's funny, or not funny, but it's a lot of people who weren't able to train or play a huge amount during COVID, a lot picked up injuries soon after coming back. And we're not talking the injuries that we've been discussing earlier. So I do think a lot of participation sport has taken a bit of time to come back. Some of the more recreational stuff has come back easier, and sooner. But whether that impact will have as big a headline number as we're discussing here, I don't know yet, because it does take a period of time for all these reports to be fully scrutinised, but it also takes a response from World Rugby and from the RFU, and because we are getting a lot of reports that are coming out, and the reactions sometimes seem a little bit defensive, and you can understand why. But also there needs to be far more conversation, far more publicly from World Rugby on this. And I do think Éanna Falvey came out and spoke this week, but it needs to be more front and centre. And I know that they're talking about it seriously all the time. Of course they are. But every time they seem to have dealt with one part of the problem, to some degree, something else comes out. So it's tough for sport at the moment. It's tough for rugby at the moment. But in this instance, either changes have to be made, or some level of mitigation has to be put in. I don't know what it is, and it's hard to watch. It's hard to read when any of these things come in on the newspaper at the present moment in time.
I guess, sorry, I know you're looking to move on, but informed consent is there now. I think anyone who's playing the game professionally now is doing so fully in the knowledge of what the stakes are, and there is information about everything now. I think in a previous generation, players could definitely claim, and probably rightly so, that the information wasn't there and the coaches weren't aware of it. But I think you have a generation now who have full information available to them, and they can't say that they didn't know that the risks were there.
It's true. It's and it may end up just in that sphere of informed consent amongst adults. I mean, boxing will still be around in 100 years, and the dangers are very well known. To segue into the sport itself, and again, it's weird to go from that conversation and talk about, stamping physicality on the opponent, but that's the nature of the sport. One of the talking points this week, Keith, and it's kind of blossomed, and we talked about it on Monday with Jerry and Liam. The length of time a match is taking is just out of control at the moment. So Munster against Zebre Parma at the weekend, 57 minutes to watch that first half, and Emerging Ireland are playing as we speak, and it seems the first 33 minutes of rugby has taken 50 minutes. So this is just interminable. And Australia, there's a trial there with Queensland's Reds of different efforts to try and speed up the game around the set piece, and things like 3 phases for advantage, and you have X number of seconds to do kicks or lineouts or throws. So hopefully that has some impact. It's just a 2-match trial, but regardless, TMO is certainly playing its part. I mean, bad enough trying to get people to play it. Getting people to watch some of this is going to take. I just don't have the patience anymore for these 50 to 60 minute halves of rugby.
No, I think it's very hard to watch, actually, and an awful lot of them are just. Look, the TMO is it a try, is it not a try? If you're able to make a snap decision on it, if you're to look for 25 minutes to find one, I don't think that's right. I think the questioning has to be changed. I think you should not be going back to see, is there a potential knock on 5 phases beforehand? You have to trust the referee to say, yeah, I saw it, I didn't see it, yeah, it's fine, no, it's okay. It should be acts of foul play and the scoring of a try, and it should be make the call for. You have 2 touch judges and you have a referee. If you think the ball has gone forward, you call it forward. If you think it it's gone back, you leave it, you don't say anything at all. I don't think we can go through this of making certain that everything is absolutely perfect. Excellent is good enough. Perfection, I think, is where we're losing all our time on it. Look, I'm still very keen on the fact of trying to have fewer subs and fewer changes to the team all the time. I think if you get, I know that could lead to other injuries, and all these things have unintended consequences. But if you get tired as the match is going on, there's more gaps on the field. At the moment, with the game being played at the stop-start nature it is now, you can be an awful lot bigger and last longer on the field. But I'd rather have players lasting for 80 minutes if it's possible. But I don't know how that can be reversed. I actually don't see it.
Oh, do you know? Okay. Andy Friend was bemoaning the fact that there was just 30 minutes ball and play time in the most recent game for Connacht. So even like from a coaching perspective, it's frustrating if you're trying to play a certain brand of rugby, not to mention the viewer experience.
Absolutely. I mean, this Queensland law trial has a couple of very good things in it. Scrum setup. There's no reason why the lads need to hug each other. Get your mind right and get into it. Like the old scrums were just. I know there's a health and safety element, but we don't need to watch them all stand around for that long before they hit and engage. So that's one way you could put a clock on it.
Just getting a breather. That's what they're doing.
Of course they are, and they're slowing the game down. Like this is one of the things that a La Rochelle or the Bulls will do against a high-paced team like Leinster, is take the sting out of the game. We see it in football, but we see players faking concussions in football all the time. We see, time wasting is an art in all sports. Yeah. The length of time a line-out is set up. That could be speeded up. You put a clock on that. The length of time it takes to take a conversion, that could be speeded up. If we could take less time with the TMOs, that would be great as well. One of the things that's happened, I think, is I think the 2019 Lions Tour has a big part to play in this, both with Rassie Erasmus coming onto the pitch as a water carrier has now led to us having a water break, which nobody wanted, and it's just appeared this season. And everyone, I was sitting in the RDS on a Friday night and they stopped for a water break, and I was like, what? This is ridiculous. And it's been brought in to limit the incursions onto the pitch by kind of different members of staff, but it's a really poor response to it. I mean, there's got to be a better way, but also the fact that every decision is relitigated both by the coaches afterwards and big files sent to World Rugby or whoever the governing body is to complain about the refs, but also on social media where people just clip it up, say, look, this is disgrace, and now they have to go out with almost a legal argument as to why I'm sending you off, and this clear and obvious explanation that takes about 10 minutes to achieve. So they have to run through it with the TMO, they have to run through it with the player, and I just think it's too laborious at this stage. Keith's right, there's too many, you've got to be a couple of replays and gone. How much of this could be done by the TMO while the ref is still reffing the game, or we're getting on with it, I think is something that could be achieved. We have a problem in the URC that some of the stadia are not up to the spec of what we have at international games. So the screen is in the far corner, so the referee has to trot or walk the length of the pitch to be able to watch the replay. There are lots of things the sport could do to speed itself up, and it doesn't help itself at times, and it would make it more entertaining without in any way impacting the kind of the essentials of the
integrity
game.
of the contest.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd get rid of the water breaks for first off anyway.
Okay, so Galway 4G pitch, Connacht against Munster. Keith, you were last time with me and you told me not to read so much into these early season games. They're only early season games, and let's let this thing settle down. So another 2 games since then, Munster eventually do win, but they score their third try in the 25th minute and then can't muster a bonus point try over the subsequent 45 minutes.
I'm sorry you brought up that quote of mine, because
so are you now more inclined to think this is more than just a bit of rust? What's going on here ahead of this trip to Galway?
Yeah, look, I actually think it is a bit of rust. I also think it is a bit of trying to change, and that's taking much longer than they would have thought. I think if you'd looked and spoken to Munster, they would have had a very high level of confidence that they'd win the first 3 games, hopefully then go to Connacht to win the 4th game, and then they know that they've got really hard matches ahead, and that they would they'd at least have got off to a flyer, and they haven't got off to a flyer. So And the problem is that they keep thinking of the next game that's going to be around the corner, that's going to be a tough one. Leinster and Bulls and all those matches that are coming in that are going to be very tough for them. So, look, they got the win from a really low level of confidence, you know, from 2 lackluster performances to then getting the win, but not doing it with the manner in which they'd like to. It's a stepping stone for them. It's now gets to the point, and like Connacht are having the exact same issue. Now they've had a harder run and they've had more travel, but they get the chance to play on their new pitch, christen their new pitch, try and get a victory that they badly need as well. Like, it isn't about Munster, it's about all the teams that are playing. And so, like, I think it's a really big game for both teams to try and get a victory out at the end of it. And I don't know that it means it's the end of the season. It really isn't. But it does put additional pressure. And when we keep talking about games and the pressure that you're under and momentum, well, the lack of momentum is pretty tough. I can tell you, I had a year with Harlequins. I think we came 3rd bottom on one of the seasons, and it was about as long a year as you could ever put down. You were just under pressure every week, emotionally every week, trying to build up different players to get to different places, trying to uncomplicate the game so that we can function. Then, you know, everything was under tight scrutiny, and this is 20 years later. The game is under far more scrutiny now than it was then. So, like, the pressure is palpable all the time. Look, I think Munster need to be able to click properly, and I did think Peter Mahoney's performance at the weekend got a decent response, but it needs more players to actually stand up to that.
In a way, Rory, like the lack of outcry almost after not being able to score 4 tries at home to Zebre on a perfect pitch in perfect match conditions almost just speaks of the extent to which Munster have fallen in the eyes of most people. This would be, as recently as 2 years ago, a massive what the hell's going on here, even if they had won the opening 2 games, no?
I think there's been quite a lot of criticism, and
everyone I've heard is saying just a bit of transition.
Well,
does it not speak of the fact that actually there is a fundamental issue of quality in that province now, if we're being brutally honest?
I think it's a reset. During what the trick with a reset is that the best teams are able to do it while still picking up the points that they need, so that they're still where they need to be at the end of the season and next season. And I think what we're seeing is that this Munster group is not good enough to reset and still pick up the points right now. I think Munster are in danger of missing out on the Champions Cup next year. I think they're in danger of missing out on the playoffs. Are they good enough to pick up the results that they need to get there? Sure, they've got good players. I believe that these are good coaches. I think that ultimately these coaches will get it right with this with a team. But this may be what they need. Maybe they need a clear out. We saw an 18-year-old make his debut for the last 6 or 7 minutes of the game and make an unbelievable impact. We saw a 19-year-old come on and make a really, really big impact. We see Munster players doing really well in the Emerging Ireland Tour for what that tour is worth. We saw what happened in Coventry last year when they went over to Wasps without most of their first team squad and produced an excellent performance. There are players coming through at Munster. Maybe they need a year in the Challenge Cup. You know, maybe they need a year where the URC is their priority, so that they get it right for those 18 games and qualify for the playoffs, and then they're seeded for Europe the following year. We still hold 2006-2008 expectations for a province that hasn't really performed, barring a couple of good runs in the European Cup consistently since 2011. You know, they haven't won anything in 11 years, so we're holding to a standard that's possibly not fair on them. And maybe the players that have been there, who I've criticised over the years, have done well to keep them getting to semi-finals and finals along the way. Yeah. But Munster are falling behind Ulster. They're way behind Leinster. They're not even comparable anymore. It needs a reset. It needs these players to be brought through, and it's very difficult to do that because of the pressure that's on them, because of the brand that they are. When they're on RTE, people will watch them because they are Munster. We will talk about them because they are Munster. They are the biggest brand below Ireland in Irish rugby, and they carry that with them. That's why they sell season tickets and all those sort of things. It's a difficult thing to do. Mike Prendergast was up yesterday. He's a very impressive coach. you hear excellent things about him. He's trying to change the way they attack, but he's doing it in a team low on confidence. It's a really difficult balance to strike.
Yeah, all fair points. 18-year-old Ruan Quinn, Keith, I understand he's from your neck of the woods. I don't want to pile pressure on the young lad. You just want to say congrats to him, and obviously he's very good if he's making his debut and becoming the youngest ever Munster player in the pro era.
Yeah, Ruan he's a cracking young fella. He lives up on one of the hills in Killaloo here.
Did you teach him everything he knows?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I'd love to take credit for that. Ruan is entirely of his own making. Well, he's one of 5 sons of a friend of mine, so there's a lot of competition in that house. But he plays with an infectious air to him. You know, he wants the ball, he wants to have a go, he wants to have a cut. But like he's been like that pretty much all his life, if we're honest. And like when you think about it, it's only a couple of months ago he got his Leaving Cert results. He won the Senior Cup with Crescent Comp. He was astounding actually during that run. I saw some of those games, and which was very interesting. Within the final, he wasn't the best player in the final because he had about 5 different people trying to mark him, but other players were able to shine. And look, he's very young, and I would want some level of caution to see him, because you'd like to fast track a guy who's 18 years of age when he's able to have the performance and the cameo of the 7 minutes that he had the other day. But you do have to remember he's 18 years of age. He needs to make certain that he does enough of body of work so that he can protect himself. And I actually think Munster have been minding him very well. I know they gave him a start, or have given him a couple of matches, but I think we'll see him only in parts during the year, because I think there is that duty of care to him. And but he's an unbelievable prospect. He really is a cracking young fella. And
to my question, which was, to be fair, a little deliberately inflammatory about the quality of player at Munster. Like, there's a lot of good players, clearly, but what, like, if you to put your finger on what's going wrong, what is the issue?
I think there's a change in philosophy, and I know people kind of throw their eyes up for that because Graham Rowntree was there for the last number of years, but he now is in the mantle as head coach. He has brought in different guys who want to attack in a different way. He wants them to be, from what I know, he wants them to be a lot more mobile, a lot fitter. There's a lot of that's being pushed. I don't agree with Rory's view that they won't get to the knockout stages. I actually think they will get their act together after a period of time. I do think that they may be shy a couple of players. They could really do with Snyman getting back into play. They could do with having all their players around at once and fresh, and having played a bit of rugby. I think if we look at any time in the last number of years, Munster played well when they had a full team there. And I know we talk about the Wasps game as an outlier, but if you take that aside, you would want them to play very well in a lot of their matches. Now, they still weren't good enough in some of the really big matches. And I think that's what Rowntree and his team are trying to do, is to try and build out the skill set for them to be better. And they're struggling with it at the moment. I think that's fairly open to see. It hasn't worked, and we know it hasn't, because the ball's going to ground too often. And you often know it when you're trying to change things. Some of the things that you did really well in the past are forgotten. And there's a bit of that at the moment. So, like, I'm still expecting every now and then, it's not to bring it back to the glory days of 06 and 08. That's not the line that Munster are trying to get to. It's trying to get to the point of where their level of performance is something that people can support and be very happy with. At the present moment in time, we're not seeing that too much because there's too many errors in it. So I wouldn't fault their effort. I wouldn't fault their attitude. I do think it's taking a bit of time, and I think we do need to have an element of patience. And I would say the same, by the way, when we start talking about Connacht, who don't have the same resources. When you take 2 or 3 players from Connacht, they can be a little bit destabilised. Now, I mean, I think that's just the nature of it. I do think both those teams in particular need to have as full squads as they possibly can, and then decide what they pick. When decisions are made for players that haven't been back or haven't played for a while, I think they suffer a little bit.
Last point, Rory. So Connacht often look at Munster at home and lick their lips a little bit and fancy getting stuck into them of late? How's it going to go, do you think?
If Connacht can cut out their silly penalties, the URC sent an email today. They've conceded 44 penalties so far this season, which is 14.7 per match, which is just too many.
Yeah.
You know, if they can get their discipline right, if they can get the emotional pitch right, if Jack Carty's back at number 10, which we'll find out tomorrow if he is, they can pick this off. Munster went down there and did quite a professional job last year. They're often very tempestuous, not very pretty games. The new pitch will be interesting to see how it impacts on it, whether Connacht can play faster on it.
Which is kind of Connacht's MO, you know.
My hunch is that Munster are, I think, a better team than Connacht and will finish higher in the table. And you know, you put them into a random pitch in the middle of nowhere and let them play against each other. I think Munster win the game. I think tomorrow night, considering they've no points from 15, there's a major motivation there for Connacht on their first home game of the season to get a performance and to get the win. But it's not guaranteed based on what they've produced this season. They haven't been very impressive in what they've done so far. No, Munster haven't either, but Munster do have the kind of better collection of players and they have that win under their belt. It's hard to call. I think possibly Connacht will edge it, largely based on home advantage and all that goes with it. But I wouldn't be throwing any money on it.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting game. Our Rugby coverage and Off the Ball is with Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us. Keith, in 15 seconds, who do you fancy Friday?
So we'll click. And I think that more players with more matches under their belt, I think they'll get it moved on a little bit. I'd say they're driving themselves mad with the drop passes and the lack of, or the turnovers that are going against them at ruck time. So I think it'll be a much sharper performance.
Okay. Now, if we're still 10 games into the season and it's not clicking, you're not going to tell me it's rust then, right?
That's corrosion, maybe.
Very good. Okay, Keith Wood, thank you. Rúaidhrí O'Connor of the Irish Independent, thanks very much.
Cheers.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.